Hi everyone, welcome. This is Molly Gilligan with the CRFM Gender Mainstreaming Initiative. Welcome to everyone for joining us today. We're so glad that you're all here and so excited for our discussion today. So as you're signing on, just a few quick logistics. If you could keep your microphone on mute and you can keep your video off, that would be fantastic. You can use the chat box to introduce yourself as you're signing in, and then throughout the discussion and the panelists, if you'd like to submit any questions, please feel free to use the chat box. When we're in the Q&A part of our discussion a little bit later, you might also see an option to raise your hand to ask a question. So feel free to use that option as well, and we can call on you to ask your questions. And just a quick note for everyone and for our panelists, we're going to try to keep to a fairly tight time schedule today to make sure we have time for discussion. So we'll be offering a 1-minute warning when for the panelists as your time is wrapping up. Okay, so Susan, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Molly, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to welcome you to this fourth session. This is CRFM's Gender Mainstreaming Initiative, and of course it's made possible by our sponsors. First of all, we have UNDP and also Global Affairs Canada, and in conjunction with the CLME Plus project. So we're very appreciative of the sponsorship that has been provided by these donors for this initiative, which began roundabout towards the end of the first quarter of this year and ends in December. And we have seen some very good products so far out of this initiative. We are currently at the stage of the regional capacity building sessions, and you've been very actively participating, and I really hope you've been enjoying it. We have our secretariat team, of course, Peter A. Murray. He's our chief coordinator for this gender mainstreaming initiative, and I'm actually helping Peter out this afternoon. He should have probably been the one addressing you, but as you know, Belize has just had tropical storm, well, it was Hurricane Nana, I think, when it made landfall, and so I think he's having some internet disruptions until they get back up and running fully. So welcome on behalf of Peter and the rest of the CRFM Secretariat team. I'd also like to express my appreciation here for the consortium team and for the good work they have been doing. And we, of course, look forward to their, to continued quality of work from them. I welcome you, and I look forward to your participation today in these discussions. And I would like to give a special welcome to our panelists today, Ms. Ruth Gutierrez Corley, I think she's from Belize, and Ms. Lisa Perch, is it Side Consulting, and Ms. Danny James from the Goodwill Fishermen's Cooperative. And I think it's going to be an exciting discussion this afternoon. I had the opportunity to listen to the recording of last week's panel discussion with Professor Reddock and Ms. Brober, I think it is, and that was very rewarding to listen to their insights about this issue that we are addressing. I won't be much longer, but perhaps towards the end, if I would be allowed, if I don't get to say it during the course of the discussion, there's a few parting remarks that I would like to share. So with that, I wish everybody an enjoyable session, and I look forward to some very, very active discussions and some key insights. Thank you very much. So I think it's over to Melissa now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited about this panel session. So I have the honor to introduce our panelists this afternoon. So as Susan mentioned, we are joined today by Ruth Gutierrez Corley, Project Manager with the Angel Lisa Foundation, who will be speaking with us about her work in mariculture in southern Belize. Followed by Ruth, we'll be joined by Lisa Perch, an environment and gender specialist, who will be sharing some of her lessons learned on mainstreaming gender in fisheries. And then lastly, Danny James, president of Goodwill Fishermen's Cooperative in St. Lucia, who will be speaking about her work in engaging women in the fishing industry. But first up, we have Ruth Gutierrez. So a little bit more about Ruth. She is an enthusiastic and innovative community leader in the fields of aquaculture, natural and marine resource management, and science. She completed her master's having been awarded a prestigious full Erasmus Mundus scholarship for a joint master's degree in aquaculture, environment, and society. The master's program was completed in 3 European countries, the United Kingdom, Greece, and France. Whilst in Europe, as a youth climate leader, she presented the Youth Declaration implementation as a matter of urgency to the Commonwealth Secretary General and the 24th Annual United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP24. Now, she is currently project manager for 2 mariculture projects in Belize, which include the proposed development of a small-scale pilot hatchery and grow-out facility for Goliath grouper in Belize, and the proposed development of a control site for the seaweed farm in southern Belize in collaboration with the Placencia Producers Cooperative Society Limited and Belize Women's Seaweed Farmers Association. She continues to volunteer at non-governmental and charity organizations, where she grows more passionate about community development and the need to diversify the fisheries and aquaculture sector. She is founder of a community-based organization named Building Belizean Livelihoods and Environment, Be Blue, in 2019, and a youth organization named Independence Youth Action Movement, IYAM, in 2015. So without further ado, Ruth, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Melissa, and thank you everyone for being here and giving me this opportunity to present what we've been doing here in Southern Belize. A lot of these projects have been presented to the Fisheries Department, to the Ministry of Agriculture, and also to stakeholders around the project area, which I'll be showing in a map. So as Ms. Melissa mentioned, the implementing entity currently is Be Blue, Building Belizean Livelihoods and Environment. I'm the current project manager for projects for Angel Lisa and Coral Key Limited, and with the partners, Mother Nature Enterprise, Belize Women's Seaweed Farmers Association, and the Placencia Producers Cooperative Society Limited. My training has definitely given me, next slide please, has given me the opportunity to look into the aquaculture sector as a whole, in a holistic view, which means looking at aquaculture in natural environment, looking at the integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. So that would include 3 different systems operating as one, and it is something that we want to do in this area. So I'll briefly go over the background of how we started up, then I'll introduce the programs that we have, the current partnership. I'll go over the value chain analysis. I feel like that's an important point. So you can see how all the actors are building this new mariculture industry. So I'll share with you the objectives of the seaweed and the grouper mariculture projects and preliminary findings, current partnerships, and benefits. Next slide, please. So this is this is the model that we developed. Coral Key is actually an island that is being rented out. It's been leased by the Turtle Inn. So this is more resort it's a private island resort. So most of the income coming from there is for sponsorship for any sort of alternative livelihoods projects. So the reason why we're focused on southern Belize is because the island is located in southern Belize. It's a few miles off the coast of Placencia. Angel Lisa now is also a key partner, as the seaweed that they use is from the Placencia Producers Cooperative Limited. So it's a way to try to promote the local seaweed. They both came together last year and insisted on the community showing leadership in the seaweed and grouper mariculture projects. So this is why Be Blue came about. Under Be Blue, we have 5 programs. One of the programs I'll be focusing in this presentation only is the mariculture. If you'd like to ask me more about the 4 other programs, then I could do that in the questions and answer section. Next slide, please. So this is the project area. You can see we are within the area of Placencia, Independence, St. Bite. So this would, and of course we and people from Monkey River is also being involved, as Monkey River people are currently moving into mainland, and this is due to environmental issues that are happening. Next slide, please. So the population roughly, it's about 4,000 plus in Independence. It would be about close to 2,000 by now in Placencia, and St. Bite would be about the same, 50 persons. So this is the project area. This is the area of influence that we're trying to capture, to try to estimate how much of the fishing populations within this area. We're still going through the socioeconomic surveys with that. Next slide, please. And we're trying to show how women could be involved within all these areas. With the seaweed mariculture project, the national goal, of course, is to expand the sustainable livelihood options for CBOs who work within the Belize Barrier Reef system. So those are World Heritage Sites, and that includes the Gladden-Spit and Silkies Marine Reserve and Laughing Bird Key National Park. So these are all around the project area of Placencia, Independence, St. Bite, and the idea is to reduce the fishing pressure. And then the objective with the proposed seaweed farm is to establish 10 farms, just used as a control site. This is for the security of wild stock, like wild seaweed in the ocean. We don't want to become a problem in the near future, and we're already foreseeing that this will be an issue. So this is why we're now venturing, all organizations are venturing to do one joint seaweed farm for use as a control site. Next slide, please. So these are just pictures of what we're doing out there. We have different culture methods. Currently, we're proposing the 3 culture methods. And the one shown in the image in the middle one, those are cultivating lines. These are like net bags, and then the seaweed grows out of it. The other ones is the raffia, which I didn't include photos of that. And then you have the submerged ropes, which is a simple rope system with raffias, which is just like lines hanging down with a little it's like but I could show later on a picture if you'd like to know more about the 3 culturing methods. All right, next slide. So here is the value chain analysis. Looks a little bit squingy, but I'm trying to show how all organizations play a key role in the entire value chain. So Be Blue focuses on the science, the research, looking at the wild seaweed seedlings, ensuring we're practicing the best methods. Of course, we're comparing methods with the Caribbean and areas across the world, just to see where we are and to monitor the events of ice. Now at the production level, we have the farmers. The Coral Key looks at this topic, this area closely. Coral Key works directly with the Placencia Producers Cooperative Limited in ensuring that they are supplying sufficient seaweed to international markets. And the international market is Angel Lisa Foundation. So with Angel and the local market here is Mother Nature Enterprise. So both of these entities, they're in the output, which would be the value added sections. So we have an international and local arm, and then the farmers are always the Seaweed Women's Group and the Peasants and Producers Cooperative Limited. And all of us, we're trying to set up this. This is a unique model, in my opinion, trying to see how we could integrate all partners into this system, and we could advise more on what sort of traceability standards we need to set up in the near future as the industry expands. Next slide, please.
And 1 minute, please, Ruth.
1 minute. So these are the products. So we're showing you the farming methods. These are the floating rocks. You have in the middle the gel, the powder, and the value added. These are just at experimental stage. And then you have the Angel Lisa that has already been through that entire stage and FDA approved. And we also produce SPF 30 seaweed and sun lotion, which is reef safe. It's the first one so far that you know it passed the checklist. Next slide, please. All right, and so the next steps is these are the crucial steps, you know, making sure that nutritional analysis are being done frequently. We get the support from the government when it comes to seabed leasing. We continue with the research, we look at funding, and then we try to see how we could incorporate more value-added projects into it. All right, and that is it for the seaweed mariculture project. And we're gonna jump into now the Cooper project. You can go into the next slide. And the Grouper project, it's basically to develop small scale hatchery, which is low maintenance. We're not thinking of huge hatcheries like what we have around here with the shrimp farms, but we're doing more small scale labs. Our advisor to this is Aqua Blue, which is just shrimp farms are around Placentia and Independence. So we've already carried out feasibility studies the past year. Now we're looking at the stock assessment, identifying spawning sites, looking at training manuals, and also doing feeding trials with lionfish. Next slide, please.
And if you could wrap up soon, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And these are the outputs so far. Next slide. And then so that's our current partners, and then the project benefits, which is all have to do with environment, socio-economical, and the local economy. And also job creation. Belize, most of the organizations involved are women-led, so it's quite nice to see women taking action in some of the in some of in the fisheries and aquaculture sector. And that's about it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oops. Thank you so much, Ruth. Oh. Okay. All right, thank you so much, Ruth. That was really great, really, really fascinating work that you're doing. Excited for the Q&A portion. So our next speaker is Lisa Perch. She's a gender and environment specialist with SAD Consulting. Lisa is a Barbadian consultant who specializes in gender and environment. She has a BA in international relations with a minor in computer studies and an MA in environmental management. She has worked in government with regional projects and at hemispheric, namely the OAS and international organizations throughout her over 20-year career. After a 13-year career in the United Nations, she has been an international development consultant for the last 3 years, working mostly in the Caribbean, but also in Africa, more recently in the Gambia, Cameroon, and DRC. She developed the Gender Equality Mainstreaming Policy for the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Commission and was the lead consultant in designing the Engender Project, which seeks to make climate and disaster recovery more gender responsive. She's currently working on several assignments, including the mainstreaming of EBA and gender and climate change adaptation, focused on the OECS countries, and gender training for the Barbados Water Authority with University of the West Indies Institute for Gender and Development Studies. She recently wrapped up an analysis of gender and fisheries value chains in 3 CARICOM countries, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname, with the UWI Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies. She is also a member of the Gender and Fisheries team, coordinated by CERMES and UWI Cave Hill. And with that, Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and to be with the rest of the panelists talking about this very important issue about mainstreaming gender in fisheries. I'm just going to jump straight in. So as you can imagine, my perspective is a little bit more broader than Ruth, so we complement each other. I'm going to be looking at some research and just the lessons I think emerged from looking at gender mainstreaming in general, and then also looking at what's emerging from doing this work in the fisheries sector. Next slide, please. So in terms of trying to mainstream gender in the fisheries sector, in my experience, I would say, and as part of the work that I've been involved in the gender and fisheries team for the last 3 years, one of the things that I think has been quite helpful is really trying to put an operational framework to what we mean by gender and really trying to identify it in a way that is more relevant to a sector where you're dealing with environmental resources, but also you're dealing with ecosystems. And so I have borrowed, I would say, and adapted a framework developed by IUCN when they developed their Gender and Environment Index. So looking at that, because it was great, what they had done was to take a lot of the work that had been done on gender over the years and looked at it in the context of a lot of the multilateral environmental agreements. And they came up with a number of elements that were important for tracking how governments were doing on gender and how that matched with their environmental commitments. So I've taken that and kind of refined it a little bit. And that tends to be how I drive or do a lot of my work in this area, and making sure that we're looking at the rights-based issues, but also we look at governance systems, that we look at livelihoods, and also look at ecosystems, because men and women interact with ecosystems in different ways, are dependent on them in different ways as well. And also look at more strategic issues in terms of access to and control over resources, and then also issues of leadership and decision-making. Who's leading, who's making the decisions, why are there patterns to that, and why are those patterns there? Are people in committees, but perhaps they're nominally, and why is it that they don't have more influence on the decisions that are being made and the outcomes that are being created? And so the most recent use of this was in the research that we just did, looking at gender in shrimp and groundfish value chains in the 3 countries. And these were just a couple of the questions that we started to look at in terms of framing out and trying to understand what we were seeing in the countries and how we would interact and engage with stakeholders as they tell us their stories and they tell us their concerns, because they too want to have this conversation. And it was very useful to be able to engage with them through focus group discussions, but also through key informant interviews. We were lucky to be able to engage directly with men and women involved in fishing, also cooperatives and other actors, including representatives of NGOs, but then also government representatives and persons working in the fisheries department. That is also very helpful to also understanding how the systems work and where there may be challenges and barriers to actually mainstreaming gender. What policies may exist but may not be implemented as much or as strongly as we might expect. So that's one element of it. Another element, next slide, is also making sure that we do this in a way that's participatory. And so what we've also tried to do when we do this work is to make sure that we're using tools and approaches that engage stakeholders in the solution making and in the problem identification. And this is an example of some work we've done in Barbados with the Barbados Fisheries fisheries stakeholders, particularly women in fisheries, in the Bridgetown fisheries market. And this we did very much to try to understand what they were seeing in terms of the patterns that were happening in different nodes of the value chain. And as you can see there, you see a color-coded approach, and this really tried to identify where we saw men being more represented, where women perhaps more represented, and perhaps where it was more or less equal. And trying to understand what that meant for each node, but also what it meant for the broader picture, the landscape, if you will, of what was happening in the sector. And this was very helpful. When we all stepped back from it, it was important to think about, okay, so if you look at this broadly now, rather than each individual question or each node, do we think that this is representative of what's happening in the sector? And this is the final product of that work. And this kind of approach is also very helpful in really making sure that voices are coming through, and that we understand some of the dynamics and also some of the changes that are happening, and also some of the opportunities for change as well. Next slide, please. Then it's also important that when we do this engagement, that we also look at how are men and women experiencing fisheries, for example. And so that's the value of key informant interviews, but most so focus group discussions. And so here you see two examples of the focus groups that we would have done in Guyana and Suriname. We also did them in Trinidad, but the slides are kind of, they restrict sometimes what you can put on them. But it was also helpful because what we got there was a different perspective in terms of how people saw themselves, how people saw what was happening in the sector, and how they saw, what kinds of boxes they were imposed on them and what kind of boxes perhaps they were imposing on themselves. So here you have on the left of the slide just a few examples of some of the comments or some of the agreed contextual issues that we heard from the stakeholders in terms of whether, what roles were women and men able to play and not play, what was appropriate, not appropriate, what was men's work and not men's work, if it was okay for women to be on a boat or not. And then we also got perspectives in terms of why women who wanted to be more involved, what were some of the barriers that were restricting their capacity or their ability to be able to do more. And to meet these aspirations. A lot of that sometimes was based on family reasons, but also some of the time it was based on societal beliefs and the lack of training and skills. We also recognize that even where we saw, positive changes, for example, in boat ownership, that didn't always mean that women were going to be taking on a more active and valuable role in decision-making on fisheries. So that we have to be careful also in terms of deciding what is a positive and what may be a negative indicator of change. We also heard, anecdotally to a certain extent, that there is a need to think about issues of domestic violence and sexual violence. I'm not saying it's pervasive, but it was brought up by groups. And obviously, we should expect this. If we look at the figures in the region across the countries where we do have statistics, and all three of these countries do, we can see that we do have an issue of gender-based violence in the region. And fisher folk and fisher communities do not live in a bubble. They live within these societies. And so this is something that perhaps needs to be given greater attention, not just in fisheries, but more broadly in the environment. Next slide, please.
Lisa, just one more minute.
Okay, sure. And then it's also important that we take the time to also look at what this means in terms of how people see issues of time use, which is a very important element to gender work. How are people using their time? What are their times being used for? How does that provide opportunities or limit opportunities to engage in a sector like fisheries? This just gives you a potential insight to the different perspectives of men and women on their own time and each other's time. And this is an opportunity and a kind of process that helps to really make sure that you can get good qualitative data that is still also sex disaggregated. So I included this because this was one of the issues that we wanted to look at in this conversation. Next slide. Also important is for them to be part of the problem solving. This is just an example of a problem tree that was developed by fisheries actors in some training I did last year with the University of West Indies for folks mostly in Barbados, but including a couple from the OECS. This was very useful also in unpacking the issues and trying to really figure out what were root causes, what were enabling conditions, and what were consequences of things we were seeing. So whether we're dealing with fish kills, sargassum, or gender-based violence as an issue that perhaps you hadn't thought about, were there connections there that would be important to persons working in fisheries, and how were they? I include this because actually for someone who works a lot in gender and works some of my time on GBV, actually this group did one of the best deconstructions of gender-based violence I've seen. And so it only goes to show you as well that even persons not working an issue can really bring very useful insights into other issues. And so while we talk about gender and fisheries, we should also think about what that means for fisheries actors to contribute to other areas as well, including gender work. Next slide.
And Lisa, if you could wrap up, please.
I'm wrapping up. And so finally, just to say that I think that when we do our work in a operational and effective way, but also in a participatory way, what we start to also see is that we're starting to improve our understanding of how gender really is influencing or determines aspects of decision making and control. And this is just an example of a framework that I've been working on and I refine occasionally, and I've been able to expand to really look at the whole issue of environmental decision making. And so moving beyond just the issue of economics and household, but really looking at how are men and women acting in the environment and what does that mean for the work that they do and how we engage with them. Last but not least, next slide, it means that we need to kind of broaden our perspective to terms of working with the system, and that when we're doing this work, yes, there are issues of poverty and vulnerability, yes, there's a marine environment, but there are other issues as well. There's governance, peace, and institutions, and there's also issues of consumption and production, which are also driving what we see in the fisheries sector. And I will end there. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. Okay, so our next and final speaker is Danny James. She is a Rastafarian woman, fisherwoman, and president of Goodwill Fishermen's Cooperative in St. Lucia. She has been a fisher for over 20 years. As a woman involved in the fisheries sector, it is Danny's commitment to help build gender capacity, empower less fortunate girls, and to encourage them to get involved in fisheries as a way to help bring them out of poverty. After suffering the loss of her husband, Danny fought to provide for 6 of her children, all on her own, and then adopted and fostered over 40 children from the surrounding areas who in some way or another needed either a mother's touch or just a safe place to rest their heads. Always believing in being her own boss, Danny decided to start farming, and soon after, her older children chipped in to help. From farming, she purchased a boat and started selling fish with her second son, and through both farming and fishing, her family of 7 was able to gain the income they needed. One of Danny's objectives as the leader of the fishing community is to encourage women to get more involved in fishing as a career. For her, fishing is very diverse and interesting, and she believes that the greatness of a person is not in how much wealth he acquires, but in their integrity and ability to affect those around him positively. And with that, Danny, I'll turn it over to you.
Let me start by thanking Molly and Melissa, who have awarded me this opportunity to be on the panelist on such an important topic as gender inequality in fisheries. I also want to recognize the other 2 panelists, Ruth and Lisa, and would say it's an honor to be present at such a forum with you esteemed ladies in fisheries. I, for my part and contribution, would always acknowledge myself first as a Rastafari woman, and secondly, but most importantly, a fisher. I said most importantly a fisher because I appreciate the benefit and contribution it has played in my life. I being a fisher, it has allowed me to be self-employed as a single parent and to be able to care for my children, and also give me a great opportunity to employ 3 young fishers and also to involve my children in the daily operations of our small business. But as an active leader in my cooperative, I also recognize the need for change. Change in a sector where it is generally a male-dominated industry and very unwelcoming of the opposite gender. But we will all agree now in these times when we are dealing with gender inequality, where women are still marginalized and earn a lower income for the same job done by the male counterparts. We are dealing with gender-based violence against young girls and women, but also in these times we are speaking and advocating more than ever for the inclusion of gender and capacity building and support of women and girl empowerment. being a fisher for the past 20 years, I could only speak out of experience. And it has allowed me to grow, to learn, and even being in a panelist discussion with Ruth and Lisa, it has awarded me an opportunity to even do more. Because in my community where I serve as a leader to the cooperative, and also on the ground, I have seen the need to involve young women, single mothers, because in my community, a lot of the single mothers, a lot of the women who do not work, who do not earn an income, they would usually use our fishing pot to socialize for a lime or just to be there, because sometimes with the hope of even getting a fish for the day. And I have engaged them into discussion, and they are willing to grow. But also in the community, there is a very vibrant fishing company owned by somebody from the town. And from the grassroots level, it has developed into a very prosperous fishing company. In that fishing company, what you find, it is HACCP certified. Health and safety standards are internationally recognized. And it's a place where I now have gone to the management, the owner, and spoken to him about whether he could allow the young girls or the young women to participate or learn to fillet, to do vacuum sealing, the health and standard measures implemented at his company, they would learn, and just to get involved in molding them and grooming them. And also at my cooperative, the manager, Mrs. Shallery, is very much involved in these discussions, and she's always willing to support us at the cooperative level. But at the governmental level, we need more to be done, because in the industry, as we all know, it's dominatedly mostly by men. And for women to get involved, the vessels we use, especially in St. Lucia, are very small vessels, which most times are not suitable for females to go out fishing. And you find if government is involved in the workshops, the seminars, the fishing company has already agreed to come on board to give the training to allow the place and the facilities to be used. So what I find, if government or the Department of Fisheries come on board to help create the seminars, the workshops, then that would enable me and also my cooperative to move on further to assist in developing these young girls. Because at a governmental level, when last we had a meeting with the government, my cooperative, my manager included, they assured us the market, the fishing market would be upgraded. Well, it would be upgraded to the standards where stalls will be available, a conditioning facility and storage for fish and all that would be involved in the development of that market. So these young girls would now get a chance to rent a stall, a market, at the market. Well, they themselves would learn the skill, fillet, clean and slice, just add value to the product, add value to the fish, and then they would sell it at the market for a price so as to earn an income, to sustain their family and their household. So there are many ways I see as a fisher, young women and girls could get involved. But again, we find we need governmental intervention, because health facilities, sanitation, it's lacking most times at the ports, because they were firstly designed to accommodate males and the fishermen. So now, in restructuring, in reorganizing and redeveloping the fishing industry to be better, we need to include facilities that would facilitate the females and women in the industry. So I, for my part, I've already started the advocacy, and we need to include the government, the NGOs, the cooperatives, and I think it's a challenging industry for females, for women, but with the help, I think it will be a very rewarding one also, because over the years, it has benefited me tremendously, and I encourage other women, I encourage other single mothers, I encourage young girls to see it as a sector where they too can get involved, and it will benefit them tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny. Great to hear from your experiences. And thank you to all of our panelists. So we'll get started with Q&A. And for all of the participants, please feel free to use the chat box to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to get through a wide range of questions. So first, our first question is for all three of the panelists. And Danny, I will start with you. And then Ruth, when it gets to you, I have a bit of a follow-up question. So our first question is about youth. So what role do you see youth and youth empowerment playing to contribute to gender equality in fisheries and aquaculture? And if you could just touch a bit more, I know you've all mentioned youth, and so if you could expand a little bit about youth involvement, and if you see young men and women involved in your projects. And Ruth, when it's your turn to answer this question, if you could also expand a little bit on youth interest specifically in your initiatives, and both young men and young women being involved. So Danny, off to you.
With my experience at the secondary.
Oh, Danny, I don't think we can hear you anymore.
In the COVID times, we have already the fishing industry and the farming industry in helping sustain us as a country, us as a community. So the discussion, I think, must start at the education, at the secondary school and tertiary level, where we encourage our children not only to look into the sciences and the business aspect of tertiary education, but also to seek ways and means where they themselves get involved in climate change discussion, in marine preservation discussion, in fishing discussion, because these two form part of the whole aspect of the environment, protecting the environment. So we also have to encourage our children, I think, from that level to participate more, because when they reach a certain age, most times a young fisher is always looked down upon as a school dropout, or not finishing school, or not wanting to do better. But if they encourage them at the secondary school level and the tertiary school level, in growing up, maybe most of them will see a different light into seeking farming and fishing as a means of livelihood, but also as a career, where they themselves could not only be a fisher, but they could be the decision makers in the fishing industry, in the farming industry. They could hold their positions, and at a governmental level, lobby for better for the organization and the industry.
Thank you very much. Lisa, do you have anything to add about youth involvement?
Yes, thank you. Just quickly, I think that Danny really hit the nail on the head, and I would say that one of the first things is to deal with the stigmatization of the fishery sector, and also the stigmatization of youth who get involved in the fishery sector. I would also say that I think promoting more some of the opportunities that are out there, as she mentioned, there is the whole issue of climate resilience, which also offers a lot of opportunities for different ways of doing fisheries. I think also the whole issue of energy, which I think is an issue for the fisheries sector and an issue for our region. and technological advances that are usually where you tend to see a lot of the youth fishers very active. But then also looking at the fact that overall, I think if we look at fisheries over the last 40 to 50 years, there has been, but there could be more innovation in the fisheries sector. And I would imagine that that would be something that could be quite attractive to young people, both men and women.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah, I think I'll just add on top of yours and Danny's remarks that from our research and what we've been seeing and the conversations we've been having, we've had a lot of conversations where it seems like the issues of decent work and the issues of youth involvement are quite related. And so that ties also into the stigma that you were discussing, Lisa. So Ruth, over to you for your thoughts on youth, and especially there is a specific question for you about interest in youth involvement in your initiatives.
Thank you so much for the 3 questions. So the first one from Mr. Peter Murray is like, what are the challenges in getting the ladies in these initiatives? Well, we haven't had challenges, surprisingly, like when it comes to cooperating with all the organizations. But the sort of challenges that we've experienced is more to do with training in project management, in reporting, and even business management. So and also it would encompass that leadership training. Whenever we launch a project, to ensure that the leaders, they would have a good idea of the work that needs to get done, and would also be community oriented. So we look at all of that to get somebody that works well with all these groups. The challenge with that is most of the women we work with, they have families, so they would need to be coordinating time and what's not. So like, for example, in the Seaweed Women's Group, the president is Mariko Wallens. So with her, when we coordinate visits to the seaweed farms to do water quality monitoring and looking at the events of ice and trying to estimate how much ice is affecting the farms, I would need to be planning this in advance. So having a strong implementation plan does influence the effectiveness of the project. And also with single parents, like they would need to make arrangements for babysitting. So it's a lot to do with how you plan your projects and your good communication. And that's what we've had so far. Another challenge with this is some sort of incentive when it comes to organizing or restructuring their business. So who we pull into that is Angel Lisa, looking at Angel Lisa best practices, and this way we can advise Mother Nature and the other entities coming up with like Ikuma. And so it's more about the communication. And now question 2, has it been possible, to engender interest of youth in initiatives? To be honest, we've been working with a lot of young people when it comes to the work of Be Blue. We do the science and the monitoring that would include diving, snorkeling the sites, doing the assessment of seaweed health, doing the laboratory work at the Independence Junior College. They've been very good with us facilitating the Seaweed Women's Group and the fishermen from the Cope. So we use their microscopes, just doing observations on the specimens. We made observations on 3 seaweed species being cultivated. The young people are involved in the reporting aspect. The incentive, of course, is their career development. They can take up topics and produce their thesis. So a lot of it is just for their community hours and also their course of like submissions. We normally contact the natural resource management lecturer, Ms. Abigail Parham here at the junior college, and we work with the agribusiness in developing the value added. That would be Mr. Mara Racinos, and we get students allocated to these areas. Another thing is, so apart from career development, is job opportunities. We offer a stipend, a daily stipend when we get the students to get involved. Through the youth group that I'm a founder of, Independence Youth Action Movement, we do every summer we do scholarship programs. I mean, I personally fundraise to get them involved. So once I would issue, like with my group, 3 scholarships, and we have those 3 students throughout the year, and then we assign them tasks in the year, and they would need to deliver that, and in that way we could fundraise again, and then issue out the scholarship. So we have that commitment, you know, because we create that sort of job for them through scholarship. Another question, the last one, is what is your representation within the government framework for plans and decision? This is still ongoing. I've been back and forth with the Fisheries Department and the Agricultural Department on this, but so far the National Seaweed Working Group, all of the concerns are being channeled through that. My channel, the way I would voice out the concerns would be through the cooperative department in Belmopan. So I would be reporting any concerns, observations made through them, and then they would voice this out in the working group. So I'm not a part of the working group, but with the Lands and Fisheries Department, the Fisheries Department and the Seaweed Working Group, they lace with the Lands Department and the Fisheries Department. Simply because they're trying to make the seaweed industry affordable. So the price of releasing the beds, it's too high at the moment. So we're still going through that process. When it comes to the grouper farm, that one is still at its infancy stage. We're currently just doing aquarium. We have an aquarium model and doing the feeding trials and still looking at the preliminary findings. And I think that would be it. I'd just like to wrap up that what BeBlue is doing is creating this enabling environment with both the private and public sectors and Southern Belize. So we did a complete stakeholder mapping of all entities involved in any sort of environmental and mariculture work. And we partner with them and involve them in the whole knowledge sharing of new findings and best practices.
Thanks so much, Ruth. This is so wonderful to hear about your specific examples with working with youth and the job training programs and scholarships and everything like that. I think this is, you know, it's been something that has come up in our discussions for the past few weeks on these capacity building workshops. So it's wonderful to have you here to be able to take the time to address this. Lisa, the next question is for you, and I'm just going to read it directly. This question is from Emmett. So thank you for bringing up domestic violence and gender-based violence in fisheries. These issues are increasingly being discussed around the world, and it's important to consider how our work across sectors impacts or can potentially mitigate violence in communities. Emmett is wondering if your findings are that violence is resulting from social stress, economic or otherwise, in the industry, or if sexual exploitation is an issue as it is in other regions, example, sex for fish. So I'll send this question to Lisa, and Ruth and Danny, if you'd like to comment on this topic as well, I would welcome that.
Thanks. So let me just wrap up to recap. The question is, can you repeat the question? So I got this last part about whether there is an element of sex for fish, sure, and then whether the stresses are social, economic, or otherwise. Just to make sure I got it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So what have you seen in your research and in your work? Have you seen that this violence is more resulting from social stress, or are you seeing this level of like sex for fish, sexual exploitation within the sector?
Great, thanks. So, well, not a great topic, but one we have to discuss. So I have to admit that when we did the research in the 3 countries, this did not necessarily come through as a big issue. And of course, you can imagine that in the conversations there were lots of topical things that came up, but it did come up. And part of it was wrapped, I think, in just general issues and concerns about safety and security for women especially. And part of that discussion was about being on the boats. Although people did also remind us that 30, 40 years ago, women being on boats was not even a big deal. So part of it, I think, is to unpack what has happened and what has changed, and what includes and addresses the issue of this resistance. And we know some of it is about the piracy and the other things that are happening out at sea. More locally, I guess you could say, in the community where the issue has arisen, part of it, I think, emerged from what seemed to be both social and economic stress. Anecdotally, persons also mentioned interpersonal dynamics, I guess is the best way to say, so if your husband's away for a long period of time, comes back, and there's gossip, that tends to lead to issues sometimes and has led to some violent confrontations in the household. The driver of that probably is neither social nor economic, but it is a more societal, cultural thing that can have very significant consequences, of course, for the victim, whatever the intentions might have been or the reasons could have been. And so we heard about a couple of incidences like that as well. Of course, I think some of it can emerge, particularly where there's a lot of economic stresses, and not just from fisheries, but also just a broader context in which the local economy and perhaps the national economy is struggling. And, the ability to sell fish, the ability to sell at a price that is amenable to livelihoods and to paying bills is an issue. And we did hear about some of the challenges that some fishing communities and some fishing households were addressing in terms of when they took on loans, et cetera, and being able to pay those back, given some of the fluctuations that were happening in the industry and the ability, therefore, to earn an income, et cetera. We didn't hear very much about the sex for fish, per se. That's not to say it doesn't happen, but it didn't come up as an issue per se. I would say that probably one of the areas or one of the times that we might need to explore for that are times like now in COVID, and also probably in a post-disaster context, where there potentially is an even bigger driver for things like that to happen. And we've seen that not necessarily for fish, but we've seen that in a lot of contexts, with generally sex for food, when there is a desperate need for food supplies in a context of a significant disaster. So those will be my two quick responses to the questions that Emmett raises. I mean, I think there's just a broader issue of understanding to what extent some of the broader social drivers and patterns that are happening at society at large are also manifesting in the sector. Because we have not necessarily always done a lot of detailed work in even understanding the societal drivers and contexts of fisher folk and fisher communities, we perhaps have missed some of this. So I think we do need to look at this more seriously, because I can imagine that it will be happening to a certain extent in some households.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing what you've seen in your work. And Danny, I'd like to, this question might connect to the GBV question and the violence and safety issue, but we have a question for you, Danny, about highlighting the social services that the fishery sector provides to the general community. The question is that it's often overlooked that fisheries act as an economic safety net, and decisions take with respect to governance have different implications for various stakeholders like youth, women, etc. So Danny, do you want to comment on this economic safety net aspect, as well as any comments that you might have about safety or gender-based violence?
In the fishing industry, I would speak out of experience for myself. In the fishing industry, you find persons who revolve around the fishing industry and participate in the fishing industry. They are not the upper class or the middle class per se. Most times you find them, they are from the coastal areas, and which are very poor, or if not poor, but not living up as the bourgeois, I would say. So most times you find the violence you'll find, speaking for myself, most times is mostly through social and economical stress, because most times you find in fishing, you are not awarded the same opportunities. Like, for instance, if my fisher needs to go to the bank, they need to keep records, submit records. And most times, fishers do not keep records. So most times the amenities and the opportunities awarded to other youth, other young women, or the young girls. You find within the fishing industry, within the fishing sector or the community, you find the fishers' children. I wouldn't speak for all, but I would speak for majority. They are not afforded these same amenities and luxuries, simply because most times the fishing industry is structured in a way where the catch do not come in every day, and most times it's a hand-to-mouth setup we have. Like you go out today, you catch a fish, you pay the bills, we feed. You go out tomorrow, you catch some fish, you pay the children's school fees. So if it's not structured properly like a business, and it's a hand-to-mouth system where you find the fisher go out and come back with the little bit just to maintain and sustain the family. So you find a lot of social, economical stress within that household, within that family. But with education, like I would always say, with education and empowering them, all these things could change. And especially at these times, we are coming up with these discussions. So I feel so positive that we're going in the right direction, where even if past years, it is not something that was spoken about or even wanting to be implemented and recognized. So coming now to this point, I am pleased, and I have hope it will be a positive step in the right direction when it comes to change and doing better.
Thank you so much, Danny, and thank you to all of our fantastic panelists. I wanted to highlight one point that Lisa brought up, the impacts of COVID. And so this is something that we have been addressing in our discussions and in our research. And this is an important opportunity to take these lessons to heart, to learn how issues like COVID might be impacting communities, particularly women and the youth. So we have one more sort of surprise fun piece for all of you all. Melissa, if you want to go to the next slide for us, thanks. So Maria Pena is on, and Maria, I have been told that you're okay if I hand the mic over to you, but we've just been seeing this really fun and fantastic communication campaign called Wednesday Women in Fisheries. So Maria, if you'd like to unmute yourself and share a little bit about this really awesome effort, we would greatly appreciate it.
Sure, thanks Molly, and thanks so much to Margot for inviting me just to give just a quick overview of what we're doing. So really, this Wednesday Women in Fisheries feature has also a companion Friday Fisher feature as well. And really, this is the result of a nice combination of communication initiatives currently underway as part of two FAO implemented projects, the Stewardfish project, as well as an SSF Gender project. And since we're not into duplicating efforts and we want to work smartly, what we are doing is in Stewardfish, there is a component on raising awareness about ecosystem approach to fisheries. This is being led by Dr. Shelley-Ann Cox of Surmeans, and she has come up with a communications campaign on EAF, and in it, she has included these Wednesday Women and Friday Fisher features to raise awareness about how these men and women in fisheries are applying this ecosystem approach to fisheries. So Dr. Lisa Soares, who is running the SSF Gender Project, and I am working on a component of Stewardfish that's focusing on gender analysis of fisherfolk leaders, we decided that we would piggyback on Shelley-Ann's EAF communications campaign. We would send our gender awareness messages out with hers so that we could push more about gender in fisheries. This Wednesday Women in Fisheries and the Friday Fisher in Fisheries features are receiving amazing attention via social media platforms, such as the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organizations. So If you are not yet on the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organization Facebook page, I invite you to go there, please, to like it and to follow the communications messages, which are going to continue throughout the year until December. So please follow this.
Thanks, Maria. This is such a fun campaign. We're really excited about it and excited to be able to share it here as well. So with that, I am aware of our time and want to wrap up and thank all of you so much for joining. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. This was a fantastic discussion and such an honor to be able to share this space with you and hear from your experiences. Susan, if there was anything else you wanted to add as well, I could turn it over to you.
Thank you, Molly. Perhaps at this point, I won't raise too many issues that I would like to raise, but just to recognize that it has been a tremendous discussion. We're really just touching on the issues. It's, you know, the hour has just allowed us to touch on these really important and deep issues that require much more conversation and networking. You know, you've had a good cross section from the community sharing their practices, and I think it points to the need for us to you know, continue the conversation and continue speaking across the board, so involving the scientists and the private sector and the public sector entities, so that we could have a more holistic approach going forward and ensure a more consolidated representation when we come to tackle this at the higher levels in terms of governance reforms and law and policy reforms and so on. Just to say, it's you know, it was interesting when Lisa shared her research, and we do have these persisting gender norms, and even the women do not see themselves in certain roles, and the men have particular views. And what is interesting, while you might be able to understand it in some situations, in the area of governance, in the area of decision making, there should be no gender distinctions. And I think that is an area where women continue to be barred. And we have less than equal representation at very high levels in the political space that is still seen to be a masculine space. And I mentioned this at the Tuesday session. It troubles me because that space is very important for ensuring that, you know, the decisions and the big decisions about law and policy, where these get taken, that they represent, we have all the perspectives, and we have more just laws and more just policies, and so we can have just outcomes, the outcomes that we are ultimately looking for. And so I think that that is a space where there should not be any gender distinction, and it is something that we have to work towards. So just to indicate that I am sure that we will have, and we should create opportunities to continue this conversation at the regional scale, and also at the national level, to mirror it at the national level, so that we have this a consolidation of ideas and a consolidation of representation as we work our way up to the reforms of law and policy, and to see the outcomes that we want. So thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to the consortium team. Thank you to those who have offered questions and to our regional partners who have shared some of their work, and to the participants at this afternoon session, which has made it very memorable. Thank you on behalf of the CRFM team.
Thank you so much, Susan. I echo all of your final thoughts, and so I won't add much except for to thank everyone again. We look forward to further discussions, and it's been a real privilege, especially today, to be able to provide this space for women working in the fisheries sector. So thanks to all of you, and please reach out if you have any questions or any input for further discussion, and we appreciate all of your time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.